Hello wonderful person, this is Anton, and in today's video we're going to be talking about a theory that it's very likely that long time ago our solar system actually had not 4 but 5 gas giants. As a matter of fact, there was very likely another very large gas giant orbiting somewhere in space, possibly in between Mercury and Sun, and possibly somewhere in the region very close to Saturn and Jupiter. And this particular gas giant, who doesn't actually have a name, but it's unofficially known as Hades, may have actually repositioned a lot of objects in our solar system and then got kicked out by Jupiter. Welcome to What the Math. Today you're going to learn something new. According to modern scientists, the current orbits of the planets, specifically Uranus, Neptune, Jupiter, and Saturn, cannot really be easily explained without something unusual happening a long time ago. And one of these scientists, by the name of David Nisworny from the Southwest Research Institute in Boulder, Colorado, has actually published a paper in 2011 describing what he thought was an explanation to some of the unusual facts about our solar system. One of those facts is why Neptune is in the location where it currently is, where it actually should be much closer. He also explained the migration of Jupiter and Saturn to some extent. And most importantly, he explained a very unusual region of Kuiper's belt, which is the asteroid belt beyond Neptune, that is known as the kernel. Now, kernel is basically a formation of various objects here that seem to have a very repetitive orbit of about 44 astronomical units. Like, for example, if I look at Orcus right here, and Makemake, and also Varuna, they all seem to have relatively similar semi-major axes, and they always seem to have very similar orbits, but they don't really have much interaction with Neptune, so acquiring such an orbit would be very difficult. This, of course, suggests that a long time ago Neptune was in a different location. So what pushed it away? And so this is actually based on several papers, this idea of having another gas giant that used to be actually present in our solar system, but then got kicked out through interaction with other planets. And so the previous explanation to all of this was that at some point Jupiter actually moved its orbit, and when it jumped orbits, basically when its orbit sort of kind of changed a lot, it ended up moving other gas giants, including Uranus and Neptune, on the outskirts, and a lot of the other objects in the Kuiper belt moved as well. However, having run these simulations, the scientist by the name of David Nisworny, realized that, well, this also seems to have destroyed the rest of the solar system. As a matter of fact, Uranus and Neptune, if you run these simulations, also jump way farther away and actually escape from the solar system completely. So that clearly didn't work. And so he made an assumption that there must have been another planet somewhere, possibly in between Jupiter and Neptune, and this planet was a gas giant very similar in mass to either Neptune or Uranus, and was orbiting somewhere in here, and interacted with other gas giants and other planets, and basically created what we have as a solar system today. And we're going to actually recreate this. But before we recreate this, let's actually also talk about what actually happened to it. So let's create a very basic solar system. We're going to place all of the planets here in order in which they really are in reality, but maybe a little bit closer to the sun, just so that this actually happens a lot faster. We're going to place Jupiter at a distance of about 1.2 astronomical units. We're going to place Saturn maybe right here, Uranus right here, and also Neptune right here. So this is significantly closer than it is in reality. But we're now also going to place another object similar to Neptune right between maybe, let's just place it here first, between Jupiter and the Sun. So right around here. And this is going to be an object known as fifth giant, also known as Hades. Now, so there's quite a lot of various papers suggesting that there's definitely a planet missing from our solar system. And there's obviously a theory of Planet 9, a planet orbiting somewhere on the outskirts of the solar system. There's also at least one hypothesis suggesting that the reason why the space between Mercury and Sun is so empty is that because there used to be a gas giant somewhere here, and then it got either kicked out of the solar system or got swallowed by the sun, but it basically is or was at some point there. And many exoplanets we've discovered to date seem to have these gas giants very close to the sun. We call them hot Jupiters, but our solar system doesn't seem to have one. So where is this missing fifth giant? Well, let's just run the simulation. We're gonna run it really fast and see what actually happens to this fifth giant I just created as we basically make it run through our solar system. It's going to interact with various planets. It's going to interact with Jupiter, Saturn, not so much with the terrestrial planets because they're too small. But at some point, it's probably going to start changing its orbit. And as it changes orbits, it will also affect other gas giants. And you can see its orbit already changed. If I look from the top here, it's already more elliptical than before. And as it basically interacts with other planets, it will affect their orbit. It will get affected by them. But it's very likely that at some point, something will get kicked out of the solar system. And so this is the simulation that was run many times by these astronomers, by these scientists. Alright, so in our first simulation, it looks like Saturn actually got affected quite a lot by this fifth planet and got sort of already pushed out to the outskirts. And this may have actually happened because we know that Jupiter and Saturn did migrate quite a lot. And Jupiter seems to have changed its orbit a little bit as well. But the fifth planet is still orbiting there. It is affecting everyone's orbits though, so they will definitely change over time. Now, according to Nisvorny, basically this fifth planet affected Neptune quite a lot. It affected Uranus, and because of this effect on Neptune, when it moved to the outskirts of the solar system, it essentially kind of affected the objects in the Kuiper belt, and then as it moved again, its effects on this particular region of space disappeared, but the objects that were originally affected by it are still there, and you can still see these ancient effects that we actually refer to as the Kuiper belt's kernel today. So this kernel is an unusual sort of orbital formation that is unexplained otherwise. Now, you can see a lot of these gas giants already changed their orbits. This fifth planet definitely has influenced almost everyone. So Uranus and Neptune and Saturn have changed their orbits. And this planetary migration definitely happened because about 600 million years after the formation of the solar system, we know that something definitely moved the planets around. And we know that this also then resulted in the so-called late heavy bombardment, where various planets, including our own planet Earth, received a lot of different collisions. And one of such collisions actually created our moon. So this fifth planet that is currently orbiting somewhere out there is or was definitely quite influential in terms of formation of our solar system. But let's see if one of them actually gets kicked out of our solar system. And I've actually run this simulation before, and it seems like in most cases, it's always the fifth planet that gets kicked out. I'm not sure if this is going to happen now again. Yeah, it definitely didn't happen again, because this time we lost our Saturn. Saturn has been officially lost. Let's try this again. We're going to run this again in a slightly different formation. This time placing the planet Hades just a little bit beyond Jupiter. And let's see what happens this time. So we're going to run this a few times until basically the fifth planet escapes the solar system. Now, this also suggests that obviously somewhere out there, there's actually a solar system planet. And it became what's known as a rogue planet. It basically got kicked out of our solar system, moved far away, and is somewhere out there. Now, this obviously will create quite a lot of conspiracy theories about, you know, Planet X and Nibiru or whatnot. But it's none of those. It's basically a planet that it got kicked out forever. And it's definitely somewhere out there, but, you know, after billions of years, it's probably really far away from our solar system and may have actually been even captured by a completely different solar system, or may have just kind of stayed there all by itself. Now, we won't definitely find it for a while because, well, first of all, it's probably not very big. And secondly, it's probably very dark and very cold, so it will be very hard to see. But the simulations suggest that this seems to be one of the best explanations. Alright, so the orbit started changing. Let's see who gets kicked out where, and let's see what actually happens. But as you can see, the Uranus, Neptune, and Saturn and Jupiter don't seem to affect each other that much, but the planet 5, because of its unusual orbit, does seem to have effect on various objects, and it's actually orbiting very close to the terrestrial planets now. So one of them might actually get kicked out, and possibly even Earth. And so here we go with the planetary migration again. Uranus is now in a slightly more eccentric orbit than everything else. A lot of the central planets seem to have been affected as well. But the fifth giant... Oh, okay, there we go. lost Jupiter and Saturn. The fifth planet is still there though. But this time Jupiter ended up being kicked out of the solar system, and Saturn acquired a very, very eccentric orbit. And on the third attempt, we're going to place Hades just beyond the orbit of Saturn, and we're going to assume that it was actually gas, not a gas giant, but an ice giant similar to Uranus and Neptune, and so it would most likely be closer to Uranus and Neptune and not Jupiter. So let's run this one more time, and we're going to see what happens to Hades this time. So every time I run the simulation, I get completely different results, but every single time one of the planets gets kicked out. And this is essentially what these papers suggest, that there was a gas giant that got kicked out, and later on the solar system stabilized various orbits and basically created what we have today. So let's see what happens on the third try here. And who did we lose? We lost Uranus this time. There goes Uranus. It's gone forever. And something right here gets a very eccentric orbit. So, as you can see, planetary migration is a very interesting topic. It's actually very complex. It requires basically very complex end-body simulations, which you can kind of see right here. And these simulations often determine the formation of our solar system and show us and explain to us how various planetary migrations worked. But it got so complex nowadays that we just have so many unexplained questions. And one of those questions refers to the idea of this so-called Kuiper's belt kernel. The other unexplained question is, of course, the missing gas giant between Sun and Mercury. And one of the other questions is, well, if a gas giant got kicked out, was it kicked out by Jupiter or Saturn? And there is actually another very interesting paper from the University of Toronto, my alma mater, that actually compared the orbits of different satellites. Specifically here, I believe we're talking about satellites of Jupiter, and the ones that they looked at was Callisto of Jupiter, so the orbit of Callisto, and the satellite of Saturn known as Iapetus, which is somewhere right there. So that's Iapetus. So having compared the orbits of these two moons, the scientists from University of Toronto established that, well, the only planet that may have actually kicked out another planet was very likely to have been Jupiter, because to have these stable orbits around these gas giants, after an interaction with another gas giant, only Jupiter had enough mass to basically maintain the stable orbits of its satellites, because in case of Saturn, it actually lost quite a lot of satellites, and many of them acquired very elliptical orbits. If there was a gas giant, like for example Uranus, that's going to be passing right here in a few seconds, passing close to its system. So because Uranus is so close now, it's very likely that Saturn will start losing a lot of its satellites, and many of them will probably fly away. And so here we go, here's that interaction, and it's very likely that many of these satellites will probably escape and become separate individual bodies. So that's one of the explanations, or one of the other explanations for why it was actually Jupiter and not Saturn that actually kicked out that fifth giant body, or gas giant. But let's actually try to run a successful simulation where it actually is kicked out, and so that we can actually settle the question of the escaped fifth gas giant and see if it actually is possible, or see if we can actually recreate this using universe Sandbox². But looks like Uranus is about to cause all of these various moons of Saturn to basically fly away and disappear. And there go those satellites of Saturn. Or maybe not. Looks like some of them escaped, but some of them actually stayed in the same orbit. Anyway, so let's actually try to do this again. So we're going to go into the new simulation. And by the way, this is actually one of my original simulations that I ran, where here's this system with Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. And there is planet 5 escaping far, far away. So this was actually one of my original simulations where I was actually able to successfully recreate this type of a hypothesis. But let's see if we can actually do this again. So this time we're going to create a slightly larger solar system, and we're going to separate each of the gas giants by about 1 astronomical unit. And we're going to place the the fifth gas giant somewhere closer to Jupiter so that it can actually interact with it a little bit faster. And let's run this again and see what happens. So this is basically another attempt at recreating this type of simulation, but this time with slightly more spread out gas giants so that they don't actually affect each other as much, except for, of course, the fifth gas giant that's possibly going to interact with quite a lot of various objects. So here we go. And there's the first change of orbit, so Jupiter has now officially kind of kicked it out a little bit further away. Now it's going to possibly interact with either Uranus or Neptune, so this is quite a realistic sort of representation here. It might also affect Saturn a little bit, but we'll see what happens first. And so right about now, there is the Uranus and Neptune. I guess it missed them this time, but if we accelerate time a little bit, we might see this happen a little bit sooner. And so this is actually kind of surprisingly realistic because this particular object actually did have a very eccentric orbit interacting with other gas giants for possibly up to about several million years. And during that interaction, a lot of various Kuiper belt objects, a lot of various asteroids got reshuffled, got basically repositioned in the solar system. And as this happened, Hades got farther and farther away from the sun. And at some point, it basically gets kicked out into the abyss of the, basically, outer solar system, into the outer space. And let's see if this is actually going to happen again, like it did for me the first time. And I'm just going to run this a little bit faster to make this happen a little bit sooner. And so now that it's actually acquired an orbit that crosses Neptune's orbit, this is where things get more interesting, because it's now going to interact with Neptune, and it will then affect the orbit of Neptune, affect various objects that were affected by Neptune, and Neptune will then kick it out of the solar system. And so here we go. Let's wait for this to happen. Any second now, as soon as it approaches Neptune close enough, it will most likely either lose velocity or gain velocity, and then possibly get kicked out. And surprisingly, it lost the velocity and now is orbiting in the inner solar system rather than being kicked out into the outer solar system. But it already affected Neptune quite a lot. Neptune's orbit has definitely been affected by this interaction. So now it's very likely that this is when it actually interacts with Jupiter and possibly gets finally kicked out forever. We think that it was actually Jupiter that kind of kicked out the fifth planet completely out of the solar system. So basically the final interaction was with Jupiter and not any other gas giant, simply because it is the most massive gas giant in our solar system. And so let's wait for this to happen, or maybe something else will happen and we need to try this again. But you can kind of see how it actually affects the orbits of terrestrial planets as well, because it orbits relatively close to them now, and it might actually even change the orbit of Earth, which is, I think, what's happening right now. This is definitely not what I expected, but hopefully Jupiter will do something about it. And here we go. So it acquired a very eccentric orbit now. It almost got kicked out, and will possibly return to the similar eccentric orbit yet again. So this actually is super accurate, because this possibly happened for millions and millions of years. It was changing orbits, it was reshuffling the solar system, and it was causing quite a lot of interaction and quite a lot of havoc, both on the inside and the outside of the solar system. And this is really why we think the heavy late bombardment may even started, because of this fifth giant that sort of interacted with various objects and caused some of the larger objects to approach planets like Earth, which then received the collision that created our moon. And other planets like Venus and Uranus may have received collisions that changed their orbits and also changed their rotations as well. And something completely unexpected happened in my solar system this time. It looks like Jupiter actually captured Hades as its own satellite. Now this is absolutely crazy. Not something I expected at all, but I guess this is maybe how many of the objects around Jupiter were captured to begin with. Yeah, this is definitely not what I expected. But as you can see, the orbits of other planets were affected quite dramatically. So here's Earth and Venus, Mercury and Mars, they got reshuffled a little bit. Saturn got moved a little bit farther away. Uranus and Neptune is also slightly farther away. And only Jupiter sort of maintained its orbit. But even Jupiter may have actually lost some of its orbital parameters if it interacted with the fifth gas giant known as Hades. And so what all of these simulations kind of suggest is that, well, first of all, the interactions with planets and various gas giants are kind of unpredictable. It's kind of hard to predict what exactly is going to happen. And so you have to run quite a lot of simulations, up to several thousand simulations, to try to see what's most likely to happen. And in this case, we actually created a new satellite for Jupiter. But in most cases, when I run this, what happens is basically this. You have a solar system, and then you have Planet 9 on the escape route, or I guess gas giant number 9 on the escape route from the solar system. This was the simulation I ran prior to recording this video, but basically this is what happened, and I created what's known as a rogue planet. Let's name it Rogue Planet Hades. And so there you go. That's essentially... Oh, and I also lost Jupiter and Saturn apparently. Ha, that's unexpected. Anyway, so that's all I wanted to talk about in this video. I wanted to present this idea of the 5th planet that used to exist, or 5th gas giant that used to exist in our solar system. And hopefully you learned something from this video, and hopefully you'll subscribe if you still haven't. Please share this video with people you think might enjoy watching various scientific and mathematical videos and want to learn more using video games. I'll see you guys in the next video. Consider supporting this channel on Patreon, and possibly comment below. What do you think would be a good name for this planet? Because Hades does sound kind of scary. Let's name this planet a lot better. So it's a rogue planet, it's a gas giant, it used to be part of the solar system. What would be a nice name? Post it in the comments below. I'll see you guys in the next video. Game you later, and as always, bye-bye. And let's actually break this solar system by accelerating it to the extreme. Oh boy. Oh, that's cool. Nothing else escaped though. That's really interesting.